All right, Stephen, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, Mike.
So, a little bit of background is that I just started this podcast. I think you're the fourth or fifth guest. We'll see how the episodes post, but
Hmm.
there's already been a surprisingly big following, and we've been talking a lot lately. Well, it's called Teach, Coach, Mentor, as you know, and we've been talking about learning and failing and teaching and how we pass on those lessons and those failures to people around us and the younger generation. And so I really wanted to chat with you because we have had a long-standing relationship, mostly over email and the occasional phone call. Although we've met in person a few times, and
Hmm.
I've learned a lot from you, and I wanted to sit down and chat with you and get some of your thoughts on a few things, if you don't mind.
Well, I am more than happy to chat with you. And yeah, we have a friendship that started, what is it now, 2025, probably more than 10 years ago, right? Or about
The
10 years ago.
2013, 2014. So yeah, a little more than a decade. Hmm.
Yeah. At the time, I was writing a column, well, I still am writing a column in the Washington Post, and you responded when you were still a Marine from Camp Leatherneck or something close to that.
Yeah, that's right. In Afghanistan.
And
Yep.
I I don't remember the specifics, but knowing you, you probably disagreed with something that I wrote, but you engaged me, and then we started a very engaged, digital pen pal relationship. That
Yeah.
was, that was really meaningful to me. That is meaningful to me, and and I know I tell you this, but I learn from you all the time. So, it's a high bar for me to try to join you here today and share a little bit of so-called wisdom. But I'm going to do my best, Mike.
Well, it was great because you actually talk about in your book, and you did not ask me to plug it, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's a
Thank you.
wonderful book called The Joy You Make. But you talked about that time, roughly where we had connected. Um, I think you were in the particular section of the book. You were discussing how you responded to emails. You were getting a lot of emails from a lot of people as a writer, as a writer does. Much of it negative, hopefully much of it positive too. And I think you had an automatic response, something like "Thank you for writing," and appreciate your opinion. I try to read everything. I might not have time, and
But
you
I'm
had
too, I'm
commented,
too,
and
too busy. I'm too busy to
that's
read that personally.
yeah, which isn't well. Obviously, I don't think the message you intended to convey, but I think it was received that way, and so you changed something about that, right? And you
Well, I
started
changed.
responding a lot more often. Yeah.
I changed the outgoing message to something that was more along the lines. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Please have patience.
Yeah.
But then when I did start writing back, I really made a point of a couple of things. One, writing to the person. So if I were writing back to you, I would have written, "Hey, Mike." I would have personalized it, and I would end it, from Stephen in some way, because I've come to learn that people don't think that there's a real person on the other end of whatever kind of dialogue is going on, and then we tend to just demonize him, her, or them in some way. We put all these stereotypes on someone without knowing anything about their humanity and how they come to what they think. And I don't actually think that I'm necessarily right or wrong. My goal in being a writer is to enhance my own critical thinking and then to engage others in conversations, much as you and I have had. And so anyway, that was a very interesting experiment. And as soon as I wrote people back, saying, "Hey, Mike," they would then write back, "Oh, hey, Stephen," and instead of like throwing out a bunch of curse words or just telling me what an idiot I was, they engaged me in the substance of whatever that matter was, and it was such a great lesson and one that I continue to this day in various ways.
Wonderful. Well, I do remember the subject matter of my email. You had written an article about the Westboro Baptist Church, which, for
Right.
anyone who's too young to remember, because the I think the audience is mostly young. They were a pretty radical church, and they were quite infamous for staging all kinds of demonstrations. And one of the things that was, at least for me, quite personal to me and particularly disturbing is that they were protesting at funerals of fallen service members. And while I can certainly appreciate, in any position that's anti-war, I think if you talk to most veterans, we are not pro-war, and we certainly, you know, anyone who's lived it knows how terrible it is. But the manner in which they chose to protest was, particularly difficult and disrespectful for most of us.
And and for me too, which is why I wrote that. And and their position was not about war. You know,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, it's about homosexuality and a million other things, and using
Yeah.
really profane language. And there is a time and a place for protest. Um, Funerals, military funerals in particular, you know, are not.
Yeah.
And it was very upsetting to to many. But
It
yes,
was.
I am remembering now that that was the beginning.
That's right.
And
And I think I suggested that perhaps the best way to reach those people, because I, like many other people, many other military folks, the first instinct is violence for sitting right towards a group of people that would.
really?
God, I mean, that's the natural inclination for many of us is anger and and hate, right? But I suggested, which is far from the same thing as actually uh, performing this action, but I suggested that maybe the best way to reach them was to go out there in uniform with the sign that said it's an honor to defend your right to free speech, or it's an honor to defend your right to protest. And again, suggesting that might reach some of them and change their minds is not the same thing as having the gall to go out and actually do that thing. But I think in my writing to you, I was trying to find, I think when I was asking the question, how do we actually engage with these people, no matter how hateful their behavior, in order to understand and make the kind of connection that you're talking about? Not to suggest that that's easy, but if it was possible, how could we do it? How could we make a connection with these people somehow and understand each other better?
And and I think you'll agree with this, that really a central part of our friendship is it's respect, but it's also difference. And much of what we have talked about over the years since then, especially especially in the political realm, is it's about difference and how we see the world differently. And now that I know that violence is your go-to step, I'm glad we've gone nowhere near there, because you're quite reasonable with your words and persuasion and logic. Um, but I also feel like the way we have come to talk, is also a model. And first of all, we start by like allowing each other to talk, and which requires the other to listen. And I don't think we always wind up on the same page, but I'll say I always wind up with a greater appreciation of the perspective that you hold, and why you hold that. And, and here's where you can say, me too.
Well, no, and likewise, yes, absolutely. So I want to chat about a few different topics today.
Hmm.
The first is that you had sent me a little while back. It was either an article that you'd started, maybe, but never published, or perhaps you did finish it at some point, and it was on failure. And that has been a theme in several of the episodes so far. And I think you have a unique take on it. So if you could walk me through what you were writing about, what you were thinking, and how you overcame it, that would be
Yeah.
wonderful.
So that is a column that I started to write in the winter, and then as a writer who understands the calendar, it was about my nieces and advice that I've given to my nieces over time. And so it's actually something I'm going to finish up over the summer, that'll be published in the fall when young people go back to school. But I had been given a lot of advice as a young person, and then as an uncle, I was giving a lot of advice. And it kind of dawned on me after some life lessons that I never said anything along the lines of, embrace your failures. Look at failures um, as opportunities. Uh, don't be afraid of failing. And as I look back on my own life, I saw a number of times where, you know, I didn't get a job. I had a book proposal rejected. Um, I got rejected, somebody that I wanted to date, all kinds of things like that. And then I went back to playing tennis, and I probably had a 35-year hiatus. And last time I played, I think I was like 17 or 18, and I had been champion of our little village, and I was all about winning, winning in singles. And so I came back. I was not very good. In fact, when I started in that clinic, I was probably the worst, but I was having the most fun. And I didn't let the game get really derided this time by the focus on winning, but it was more on enjoying it, improving, making new friends, being outside most of the time, except here in North Carolina where it's 9,000 degrees.
Yeah.
Uh, but there was so much to be seen, from the daily failures on the tennis court. And then I was interviewing somebody for my last book, and he was kind of talking about the importance of play, but he used this phrase, which I actually think it was originally used in the military first. It's embrace your suck. Anyway, it's not original to me, but it really was kind of the notion that I'm talking about, which is, it's part of who we are, and there's much to be learned from every misstep that happens, and
Yeah.
you know, and I feel that this is kind of a harsh lesson, but as you know, my sister died 2 years ago, and she's the mother of two of my nieces, and that was very challenging. But I also think that the resilience that they learned at a young age has made them stronger people, has made them sort of more emotionally equipped for circumstances that they might not ordinarily choose. And not that it's a trade-off, and not that one would ever have wished this, but even something that is so in a way so awful has its lessons, and we have to find ways to be open to them, at the same time as experiencing loss and grief, and so on.
Yeah. When you first started to chat about the tennis, I'm gonna shift back to a funny story, which is an
Okay.
awkward transition because you finished on an emotional point. But when you were talking about tennis and having fun, even though you weren't playing well and you were making friends, it reminded me of a study that was done a little while ago, and I can't remember who did it, but I think it was one of the authors of the Freakonomics books, maybe Steve
Hmm.
Levitt, because I think either he or the other author is an avid golfer, and there's this huge study that was done, and I might get the details wrong, but I definitely have the gist right, where they took a bunch of amateurs and said, hey, half of you go for the lowest score you can possibly go for, and then rate your fun afterwards, and the other half, your score doesn't matter, go for every hero shot that you can muster, and then rate your fun. And so they send these two groups out, and the groups that went for every hero shot, no matter their score, reported having an amazing time. And everyone who was trying to shoot the lowest score possible, their happiness was clearly correlated with the score of the shot. And so, I think this is especially true for me too. When you're trapped in the woods and you have no clear shot out, and you go for the hero shot, most of the time you're going to have a great laugh after. Like either it's going to make it and everyone's going to go, "Oh my god, that's the best thing I've ever seen," or
Amazing, amazing.
you're going to hit a tree and go back 50 yards and you're going to have an incredible story to tell afterwards about how funny it was that you almost hit yourself with a golf ball. So, I think there's a lesson in that for sure.
I think that is the perfect corollary. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I'm sure you play golf quite well.
Well, it depends. It depends on if you're watching me. So, if you're not, I had a great round.
Yeah. And I'm playing tennis later today, and I'm sure I'm going
Great.
to win.
Yeah, yeah,
Or
very
I'm going
good.
to.
Yeah. On the more emotional front, so we have talked about failure a lot on the podcast, and it's mostly been in the kind of the domain of school or work or kind of normal life failures where it's just completely unreasonable that you're going to win at everything you do or even at most things that you do. And so we've tried to work on reframing winning and losing. And forgive me for those that are going to hear me articulate this again. We've done it a couple of times, but I think it's worth going through. Is instead of framing this as winning or losing, because I think that's what most people how most people think about success and failure, or they frame it as some component of their identity that if I'm successful, then that's because I'm a successful person, or if I fail, it's because I'm a failure. And both of those are not just wrong, but they couldn't be more wrong. And the way that I've tried to frame it is on a learning uh, spectrum, if you will, where if you're failing, it means you're in the learning process. It's the direct indication that you're currently learning, and if you're successful, it's an indication that you already learned, right? That you came by some lesson that you managed, some earlier failures that you've now corrected and learned about. So now with your with loss and deep pain, that framework isn't exactly applicable, and that I wouldn't propose to give anybody advice on how to deal with pain and loss when we think about those sorts of things in life. But I would say your book is a wonderful starting place to start to consider that. Some of the best advice that I've ever heard, and I can't remember which public figure said it. It might be Jordan Peterson. He said you should endeavor to be the strongest person at your father's funeral, and I really like that. I think that there's a lot to unpack there, but I think that's what it means to have a responsibility to the people around you, to learn how to not just survive, but even thrive through intensely difficult times of your life. And one of the nice is not the right word. One of the enduring themes of every single person's life is pain and loss. So at least it's something that we have universally in common that we can connect through, and you can find joy even in those most painful moments. So I don't if you wanted to maybe
Well, that
elaborate
was
on that.
that was really the genesis of that book. How can we find joy in darker times? And this was before Julie was taken ill, but um, in an earlier year, it was 2017. My parents died. My mom died in January of that year. My dad died in April. I separated from my husband in between, and then Julie was diagnosed with cancer later that year. And that was a very, that was a challenging time. Yeah, since then I've come to learn from others, just how prevalent, especially as we get older, these kind of losses are. So there was really nothing unique about that, except maybe they were a little bit compressed on the calendar, but not always the case there. And so I found myself though, challenged and down, and started to do what I usually do, which is to read, and wound up reading about joy, and that was kind of uh, you know, just a fluke, but joy started to speak to me, and there were various exercises that were talked about. Keeping a gratitude journal was one of them, and I was very doubting about the efficacy of that, but the science was there, and I know you and I both are strong adherents in science, and
Big
so
science fan.
we're
Yeah.
big science fans. I can tell you all about the volcano I made in eighth grade and how it exploded just as it was supposed to. Um, but 3 weeks of doing a gratitude journal, science said you would see an improvement in your mental health and you would start to feel more joy. You'd be really essentially waking up on the right side of the bed rather than the wrong side of the bed. And, that had to do with really how you adjusted your attitude when you were going to sleep. I didn't write them down, but I was going through my list of grievances in the evening. Well, this didn't happen, or so and so said this. But to go to bed having written down, 3 or 4 things that you were grateful for, which can be, first I thought they needed to be like really the big bang stuff. I solved climate change today.
Right.
Right. I solved the tariff problem, whatever. But once I was, off my high horse and was really sort of focused on, what was happening in my life, it were things like, you know, I played tennis today. I went for a walk with friends. My dog, rolled over 6 times and was happy. It was really the small joys, the small connections that mattered the most, and it was really around those connections that I felt grateful. And in a sense, gratitude needs two people to
Yeah.
to exist. And so from that, I learned about, I'm gonna seek deeper connections, more connections, and so that was one of the exercises that I did. The book has about 25 different ones, but it's my journey through life over about 5 years, and what I tried that worked, some of it didn't work, but sort of incremental changes to having more joy, which is not to say there's still darkness in the world. There's still challenges in the world, but we can't we can't really live if we're going to be entirely in the dark. Humans need light, we need water, we need air, and we need joy.
Yeah. I so in the course that we built, I suggest a few habits that everybody should implement into their lives, kind of these keystone
Hmm.
habits, especially when you're young. And so we tried to keep it as scientific as possible. So we dug into a lot of the research and really tried to rack and stack. If you had to make one change in your life today, what would it be, in so much as that it has the maximum impact on your life in the long run? And so there's a few. Having a bedtime is one of them, and sticking to the bedtime is huge. Even more important than the amount of sleep is the consistent time going to bedtime. Is
Is
really
this just for kids or is this for all big people too,
no.
Mike?
This is I have a bedtime alarm on my cell phone. It goes off at 10. The
Hmm.
phone goes away, and I'm allowed to read in my bed until 10:30, and then 10:30 it's lights out. It's bedtime. And then I try to get up at the same time every day. If I need to get up earlier to do something, I will. But so that one's huge. Physical activity is huge. There's a few, and one of them is a gratitude practice. And I was shocked to see how high that ended up on the list. And so one of the two things that I recommend, especially for everybody, but for our audience specifically, is have a notebook by your nightstand, and we recommend that when you wake up, you write down your three priorities for the day, whatever those are. The If you do that for a few weeks, your efficiency goes way up, and it could be as simple as one of them could be, don't forget to write down my three gratitude statements tonight, right? Another might be, go to the gym, whatever it happens to be. But you wake up every morning, you put your three priorities in, and then when you go to bed in the evening, you write your three things that you're thankful for. And those two, I like combining those two practices because they typically happen at the same spot, and they have a huge impact on your life. It's really impressive just getting your mind framed in the right way to prime yourself, to be even to be exposed and able to receive the joy that's around you. I think so often we are completely lost in thought, and I know you've done mindfulness practices and mindfulness retreats, so you know a lot about this. But I think so many people are so lost in thought all the time, whether it's complete daydreaming or scrolling on the phone, that they're not even aware of what they're actually thinking. And if the preponderance of your thoughts are negative and you're not even really fully aware that they're negative, then you're just living in this really crappy nightmare, and you don't know where the unhappiness is coming from, right?
It's interesting to hear your keystones because the gratitude journal that I wound up using most of the time, and I found it in a local store. But on the page for the day, you make a notation about, did you exercise? What did you do? And something about any kind of mindfulness practice, whether it's yoga or meditation. And then it becomes clear on the days that you felt better, you were more likely to have done those things.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you sort
So
of
you can see the correlation of if you're not working out, not being mindful.
right. There's a mood
Yeah.
meter that you do at the
Yeah.
end, beginning and the end of the day, and so once you start to see those things, then that's added impetus to do them. Um,
Yeah.
Now my body tells me when I don't have the time or get lost and don't do them for whatever reason, you know, I feel it. I feel it.
Yeah. So I want to talk about writing. Um, I don't. You have correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I've read the book. Do you have a writing for joy section? I don't think.
Well, I there's a chapter on the joy of writing by hand.
Yes. Okay. So that one I really liked because you talked about signatures, right?
Yes.
And everyone had their own personal signature, and it said a lot about them and handwriting. And I think you talked a lot about letters from your mom.
From my grandmother and also how, we hardly do any letter writing these days. So, here we've known each other for, a long time. I don't know that I've ever, well, probably the first letter I got from you, the letter, the envelope was probably
Hold,
handwritten.
hold on a
Um,
quick second, Steven. I lost your audio. Can you
oh,
still hear me? Okay. Oh, there you go. You're right back. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep
okay.
going.
Um, I was saying, most of the time we don't write very much by hand these days, so we don't
Yeah.
know that aspect of each other. I don't know your handwriting, you don't know mine. And it's I look back at my grandmothers and my grandparents, and I'm a hoarder of things like this, or more appropriately put, I'm the family archivist. So, but like my grandmother, she's born at the turn of the last century, and she was taught to write in that very flowery Palmer cursive.
Yes. Yeah.
So every letter to me is, she signs off love grandma. So the L and the G are like, these
Huge.
creative works of art.
Yeah.
But there's the tie to the memory in that. There's the form of communication, and going back to the science, there's much to be gained in actually spending time, with a pen and, with a piece of paper in terms of the creative process. It creates a certain mindfulness that does not exist when I'm on the laptop or
Yeah.
the desktop. It's not efficient, but one of the practices I do every year is I handwrite one of my columns as the first draft. And so
Okay.
then I get to do hand edits, and I know all the copy editing, icons and so on. So it's kind of esoteric, and then I copy it over, but it's it feels like a much more creative process that way.
Well, it's interesting that you use the word inefficient because I my question would be inefficient in what regard? Because when I
Mhm.
look at the studies on students who take handwritten notes, it is much slower than typing, but the amount that you retain is significantly larger. Um, there is just no substitute with sitting down and doing the work by hand, right? I mean, and the same thing happens when you read, when you listening to an audiobook or reading something on a screen, scrolling does not have nearly the same retention power as reading a physical book, which, by the way, pales in comparison to reading a physical book and writing physical notes next to it on what you're reading. The retention is increase is incredible. So when you say inefficient, I would
Well,
respectfully disagree that
yes. Well,
the what you retain is so much more effective. You would have to reread the whole thing. You would have to, you know,
and I will say, you know, when those pieces that I write by hand, I think they're better. They're more thoughtful, they're better argued, better laid out. It's a good point that you raise. Part of the challenge of these days is, we measure everything by time. How much time does that
yeah.
take? And we're all so short on time. You know, you know, I don't know why it's said to be a virtue when someone tells you, "I'm so busy." Yeah, my grandmother, the other grandmother, she always said, busy people are happy people. And I remember when she would say that, I was like, I'm not sure about that, Grandma. She was coming from a very different, from a different background where it was about motion and distance and so on. So they're really different ways to look at it. And but I have here's a little wrinkle. So I did this TED talk, I guess 5 years ago now, and you have to memorize your talk. And one
Yeah.
of the techniques that they suggest that you do is you handwrite your talk every effing morning. And so I was, I'm a good student. I did it every morning. I was hanging them up like on my wall. Um, I couldn't read my own handwriting, but it worked nonetheless.
Yeah. That's great. I like it. Yeah, writing is really it's a powerful thing that we're losing. We're losing rapidly. And I love all the new AI tools that are coming out are really so impressive and they can be incredibly useful, but people have to be really careful not to let it replace your thinking. Um, and 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 it's interesting what you said about time. I saw a quote recently. I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like time is the only currency that we failed to budget for. Right? It's a constantly you're constantly losing it. You can't get it back, and we seem to waste it absolutely frivolously. Right? You can never put more time into the bank, and we're very willing to just shell it out. So I do think we should be more effortful in deciding what we do and what we spend our time doing. And I would argue that choosing to spend more time writing pays back far more than what is spent. Um, I could be
Well,
wrong, but
well, I don't know if you're ready to talk about this at all, but I know you've just started writing a book, and
yeah, yeah.
you might tell me that before we started, so I don't know if it's meant to be a secret, but
No, it's okay. Yeah, yeah.
you
I
know,
mean, no. In six
what are
years,
some of the
people are going to be
challenges?
asking me where the hell that book went. Hey,
So
where's that
what are
book you
some of
didn't
the
write?
challenges, and how can I be your mentor here?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I would say first of all, I've enjoyed it immensely. I actually had to do some physical writing because I was recently on some a training exercise down in Quantico, and the students were going through lots of classes on military tactics, and so I was the officer in charge, so I wasn't teaching the class. I had other officers doing that, but I wanted to be present in there while the students were in there, so that I was involved. But I've seen these classes many times, and so I sat in the back, and I didn't want to bring a laptop and be typing away the whole time, and so I have a digital notebook that I write with. It's a tablet. It's not like a bright screen. It's a different kind. Um, and so I sat in the back and I was physically handwriting. And I will say the first thing I noticed immediately was how long it was taking. I was like, oh, holy cow, this is, it really took a long time. But then as I was back in my room and I'd have a chance to type, I would do a lot of typing. And it was unquestionable difference that it was much faster and uh, not nearly, the writing wasn't nearly as good. And I think one of the things that writing by hand forces you to do is it forces you to slow down, and so you're naturally thinking more as you're writing. The other thing that it also encouraged me to do was to stop revising on the fly, because if I can type a sentence very quickly and then I immediately notice that it's a crap sentence, then I'm gonna want to go back, and I am now caught in I really want to fix this. But as I was writing by hand, it took so darn long to write the sentence. I'm not going to go back and edit it now, and that's a problem that I have. I've never I've written a few articles, scientific articles. I've never written, in a professional way for an actual audience who is going to read something that I had to say. But for whatever reason, I desperately want to make it perfect. I want to make everything perfect as I'm going, and I understand that that's a horrible way to write. That you need to get it all out and then go back and work with the material again. So for me, again, going back to the efficiency piece, I think it is far more efficient actually to write long form. Not only are the ideas more set in my mind, but then I'm not trying to revise as I go, and I can come back to it, make handwritten changes, and then probably as I'm writing it for the second time in a word processor, oh, this is the second time I have written this, and things will be formed more clearly, and hopefully I can edit in that process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's for people who are listening to us and maybe it's not quite gelling. I recently had to write a sympathy card, and we all struggle with that. And that is kind of one of the letters that still needs to be handwritten in my humble view as a manners and etiquette expert from time to time. But think about when you've done that kind of exercise. You really have to sit there with your page and think about, the person you're going to describe or the next of kin. And what happens in those moments is kind of you know, the secret sauce, the magic of writing and feeling and connecting all of those things. So, small example of a big thought.
Yeah. I want to connect this to students. So, like, half of our audience is vets, and the other half is young students. It's a cool audience.
A
Yeah.
natural mix, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
Well,
so I want to talk.
you're a vet, father of two.
That's right. I want to talk to everybody, but maybe this students a little bit more. I think I run into this a lot where I get the response of, "Well, I'm not a writer," and I I can't disagree with that more. There was an anthropologist, and I forget his name. I'll put it in the show notes, but he had gone to visit a tribe in Africa, and they were doing a dance ritual, and he was invited to dance with them, and his response was, I'm sorry, but I don't dance." And to this tribe, that was like, what do you mean you don't breathe air, right? This is what we like, people dance, and they just couldn't fathom someone who didn't dance. And but he was trapped in himself and in his inability to express himself in that way. And I identify with that. I don't like to dance. I just imagine everyone else looking at me going, what is this guy doing?
Oh, I would love to
um,
see that. I would love to see.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think in a lot of ways we all see ourselves that way when it comes to writing. Well, I'm not a writer. Well, you are a thinker, and so if you're a thinker, you're a writer. I mean, it's writing is the most formal process by which you organize what you think and how you think.
I wouldn't even say that you have to be a thinker. I always think we all have stories to tell.
Yeah,
And by putting them down in some way, on paper, on a, in whatever way, that's the art of writing. And and some people do it by actually recording themselves and then transcribing that. Those people are writers too. It's like with too many professions. You know, Fortunately, there are no degrees really associated, with being a writer, unless you're going to count like an MFA type of degree. But lawyers and doctors, they all sort of boost their reputations, through these processes. And there's something just very democratic about being a writer, and also about blogs and that sort of thing. You know, you can now you can put it up online, you can share it, you can use social media. Um, you're there. Um, you know, whether you're paid for it is a different question, but that's not a prerequisite for being a writer. It's a
yeah.
good thing.
There was another book that I brought. I have it here with me that I know you said you'd heard of, was
Yeah.
this Writing to Learn by William Zinsler. It's
Hmm.
a wonderful book for anybody who wants to check it out. And the reason why it's important to me is that there's a it's funny what he's talking about in this book, which is 20 years old, is that it seems to be writing is the purview of English professors and teachers only, maybe a little bit of history and a few others, but that it doesn't belong outside that department. And the central thesis of the book is that he disagrees with that, and he spent a lot of time with a particular college many years ago that required other departments to add writing to their curriculum. And we're talking chemistry, physics, biology, a lot of the STEM courses that we wouldn't normally associate with a lot of writing. And the writing was required, whether it was daily reflections, whether it was an essay on a topic, you know, whether it was just answering long form questions on a sheet or for an exam about a particular topic. And the response, by and large, at least with the students in those courses, was extraordinarily positive. It was rough at first, right? There was a lot of resistance. Why am I writing in this course? And what he said is, look, it's everyone's task on the education front to teach writing. And in the book, and this is why I recommend people read it, he gives examples of beautiful, wonderful writing in domains you never would have suspected. There's a passage on geology, and before I read it, if you'd said, and I'm interested in a lot of science, but if you said,
No.
"Hey, Mike, do you want to read this passage on geology?" I would have said, "No, no, I don't want to. I don't want to read about that."
Yeah.
And it's wonderfully written. It's a beautiful story, right? I mean, the really great writers are great storytellers, and these folks in these different domains turn out to be wonderful storytellers in this scientific niche, and then they're able to communicate that in a way on paper that people can fall in love with. And so I don't want students to miss out on that experience, both on the reading front and on the writing front, whatever classes they're in and they're taking.
Yeah, and on this note, I would say, I think I'll go out on this limb. You know, the way to become a better writer is to become more of a reader. No matter if you're a young person or more advanced on the life plan there. I make sure to spend a part of every day, even if it's just 15 or 30 minutes, reading. And it, I'm constantly learning. I look at how a story is developed. I look at how sentences are crafted. I also just sit back and and learn or enjoy. But you know, I um I was lucky when I was growing up. My parents were both pretty big readers, and they wanted us to my brother, sister, and I to read a lot. And so they came up with this, I guess, this competition for us. We could watch as much television in a week as hours we read.
Oh, I like that.
And there little Stevie was, 'cause he wanted to watch a lot of television, I was
Yeah.
reading a lot, and didn't work quite the same way with my brother. He cheated at it, but anyway, it's a good way to sort of think about things,
Yeah. Well, I like that a lot. I do want to go back a little bit though, because when we started talking about your book, so we had the joy of physical handwriting,
hmm
but I was surprised to see no chapter on the joy of writing in general. So, was that a chapter that we missed, or is that
That's
something you kept for yourself?
well, I left about so this book has 28 chapters, and I did leave a good 20 25 on the cutting room floor. I thought that was a contender. I did feel that with the joy of writing by hand, and then there was a chapter on the joy of reading that it was a little bit redundant in that case. And
Ah, very good.
um,
Okay.
and the other thing that I just want to say about reading, not only can it help us become better writers, but it really helps us, um, in a sense, become better humans, um, especially with fiction. When you're reading about people who are often very unlike ourselves, and maybe they're even unlikable, but you come to have a connection with these characters, and it helps you develop empathy. Uh,
Oh yeah.
that we all need to practice. One of my favorite scholars is a fellow at Stanford called Jamil. His name is Jamil Zaki, and he wrote this book where he sort of challenged the notion that you're either born empathetic or not. And he's looking at neuroplasticity and how we can really grow our empathy, and literature and books and reading is a big part of that. So
Yeah.
then another reason to read, and in that matter, it doesn't matter what form, whether it's a physical book or on a device.
So I have a theory about reading. I
hmm
think if we go back to thinking, I I think that reading is one of the more reading and writing are the most formal ways that you can think. And when you sit down to write something, because you have to organize it, reorganize it, reread it, rewrite it, have it edited, what you are producing when you write something is the most polished, organized, detailed version of your thoughts. It is your best thoughts. Nobody writes something and sends it out, and we're not talking emails here, but formal writing, unless it's the very best version of what they can conjure up in their own head. And when you read, you get access to the infinite library of human thought. It might as well be infinite because none of us have time to read it all.
Right.
Of the best human thought that human could generate, right? And even more than that, because you are your thoughts, right? I don't know how to separate your thoughts from you.
Hmm.
When you are reading someone else's thoughts, you are thinking their thoughts. You're thinking their very best version of those thoughts. And in a very abstract, I don't want to get too metaphysical or philosophical here, but in a very abstract way, you are becoming another person. You are thinking their thoughts. Right now,
Yeah, you're inhabiting their skin in a certain way.
yes,
I will
it
add,
is the highest form of empathy, right?
yeah, I will add a
If you can
caveat.
get your own judgments and your own thoughts out of the way and just and sit with it and consider it, yeah.
Yeah. So I have a caveat though to what you just said. Um, so I've written, I guess I've written 7 books now, and my first book was published 1990. So I would say at the time I submitted that manuscript, I did the best job that I could. Yeah. A month later, I wanted to revise it, and now, 25, 35 years later, I would rewrite the whole thing. So it is a snapshot in time. And unfortunately, every writer I know would love the opportunity to keep going, but you also have to live within the practicalities of we would never finish anything if we treated them
Yeah.
like cathedrals, which are sort of always in a state of being built.
Yeah.
So don't take that on that if you're thinking about writing that it has to be perfect. There is no such thing
Of
as
course.
perfection
Yeah.
when it comes to writing. And then then we could get into the whole debate. Is good enough, or is excellence the enemy of finishing something?
Yeah. I Well, also, whose perfection? Is it your own version of perfection, or is it the perceived uh, perfection that you think the readers will have? Right? Every reader is going to bring themselves to the text, no matter how honestly they're trying to inhabit your words and be unbiased and objective and disinterested. There's no avoiding bringing some of themselves to it, and everyone's going to approach that text in different ways and receive it. So I mean, the other maybe advice that I would give, especially for someone who's writing for other people, is that it's going to become something else once it's in their head, right?
Absolutely, and people will interpret it in their own ways. It's like looking at a painting in a museum. The painter may have had his or her own view of what that is, but you look at
Yeah.
it and it's open to how you see it, and that's
Which is
real joy and real beauty to be able to both to let go and to give it as a gift,
That's
whatever
right.
it is.
And the evidence for that is like texts between you and your spouse, right? Or you and yours, right? I can't tell you how many texts I've read where it sounds angry and it's not, right? I always joke we need a sarcasm font or some sort of an emotional coloring system. So, but I mean, we've
Well,
all misread or misinterpreted messages because of what we think is actually happening.
I have started using the clown emoji um, to indicate sarcasm. And
Oh, I like it.
everybody knows that that's what I do because sarcasm you just cannot it cannot be translated without a little bit
It
of help.
can't.
And I have
Yeah.
having grown up in New York City, I have my deeply sarcastic vein within me as much mindfulness as I have overlaid on that.
That's funny. I meant to tell you this story, and maybe I already have, but I think it's worth chatting about it again here. Maybe it was a year or two ago. Avi, who, for those that don't know, that's my oldest daughter, and yeah, it had to have been a year or two ago, and she was asking about lying. She was very interested in this concept of not telling the truth, and so I tried to explain the concept as best I could, but then inevitably I would make a sarcastic joke and she said, "Well, Dad, that's a lie." And I'd say, "Well, that's not a lie because I'm saying it in a way that implies what I'm saying is I couldn't describe it to a 6 year old, right?"
Rather sophisticated.
Yes, I said, "Okay, yes, I'm saying that something that's technically not true, but in the understanding that you also know that it's not true, and you see my body language and my smile, and so that's not a lie. And then we went on to implied. I had said something about implying something else in the statement. Well, if I said this, then it implied that. She said, well, what's implied? And so then she thought that was a lie by omission, because at some point we had talked about that, and we just got tangled in some of these words. And I should have called you if I didn't, and to ask for some advice on how to get out of this trap I was in with this 6-year-old.
He sounds very much like you, Mike.
Yeah, yeah, she's smarter than I am. I don't know.
No, inquisitive, holding people accountable. It's a good
Yeah.
trait. It's a good set of traits.
Yeah, well, she still keeps me on my toes. She's only getting smarter and more aware of the world. So
I'm sure. I'm sure.
there's the joy. There's a lot of joy in parenting, despite all of the challenges. So,
Well, she has two wonderful parents and a wonderful sister.
well, thank you so much, and a wonderful Uncle Steven. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Well, maybe in the last few minutes here, I want to open it up to anything that you'd like to talk about. I could talk to you for hours.
Well, I'm
I don't know how long everyone's commute is, but
yeah. Well, for those of you listening, I said to Mike, we can have an outline of what we're going to talk about because a lot of producers do that. He said, no, let's just see what happens, and which I was absolutely looking forward to. And I kind of like how we've gone, you know, here and there, and when we've gone a little bit down a rabbit hole, you've been very good at pulling us back to, well, we're actually talking about such and such. Um, yeah, I love that you have these two distinct audiences to start off with, and I hope that being neither of them myself, I will start to be a bridge for you, and I'm looking forward to promoting this, and and boosting you as well,
well,
my
thank you.
my friend. Yes, um, but yeah, what should we finish off with? What's going to happen? What's going to happen in the world as we
Ooh,
it's July 2nd here, right?
yeah, it is. Well, let's finish off with some fun stuff. So this weekend is July 4th and Independence Weekend. I'm a big fan of revolutionary history. I love reading, although it can be very difficult and dense. 18th century and 19th century scholars in writing. I think the way that they communicated back then was it was poetry. It was beautiful the way that they wrote. Again, sometimes the run-on sentences and the commas can get in the way of understanding occasionally, but really cool. So I'm gonna spend time here at the house, and we're gonna barbecue and hang out with the family, and hopefully have a nice time. I'm gonna try to get some golf in over the next couple of weeks. I know you're working on your tennis. I'm working on my golf game. I'm gonna go for every hero shot because I know the science on happiness. So I'm excited for that. And then outside of that, this show has been so much fun, and we've got some more folks that are going to come chat, and this has been a great experience. And so that's what I'm up to. I just want to know what you're up to and when we can get together next.
Well, um, so I am up in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Which is beautiful, by the way. Every time you share a picture, I'm jealous.
It is beautiful. It's a lot of greenery, and actually
Yeah.
this way looks towards Grandfather Mountain. So I have friends coming up this weekend. We're going to do pretty much what you're doing. We're going to do some grilling. We're going to hiking, having other friends over. It's kind of a sociable weekend, and we'll go to the July 4th parade in Blowing Rock, which I believe is actually on July 5th, Saturday.
Okay.
Um, another holiday that we can just move around.
Yeah.
So looking forward to a good time with food, with friends, and the outdoors. So
Perfect. There's a lot of
then
joy
we
in
will
that.
figure out, the next time that we see each other, and I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take one of your assignments to heart, and
Um,
I'm going to write you a letter. That is one of your assignments in the book, and specifically the joy of handwriting. And so I'm going to write you a personal letter, and I will invite you up for a weekend. We'll go see the Naval Academy. We'll go see the sights. We'll have some bourbon. You need to make your bourbon pecan pie. I was rereading portions of the book to get ready for today, and I had totally forgotten about that section.
Well,
And
the
so I,
recipe is in the book as you know
it
it.
is, but
And
I can't
but,
make it like you can. Yeah.
right.
So
Um, well, that's a deal. Yeah.
perfect. All right. Well, we'll
Okay.
see you then, Stephen.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.